Since the 1980s, hurricanes have grown dramatically stronger, intensifying by more than 250%, turning each passing year into a greater threat than the last. Now a light drizzle settles over a quiet coastal town named Dakota, but beneath that calm surface, something far more dangerous is building. Inside her home, Dakota sits trying to place an online grocery order. The response isn't what she hoped for. The store is shutting down early because of the worsening weather. Frustrated, she glances out the window and notices neighbors hurriedly packing up, preparing to evacuate. Determined not to rely on anyone, she decides to head out on foot. She pulls on a raincoat and steps outside, but the scene is overwhelming. People rushing, tension in the air, the storm creeping closer. The chaos quickly triggers a wave of anxiety, and she struggles to steady herself. A neighbor approaches, cheerful and unaware of her distress, mentioning how long it's been since they last spoke, especially since her mother passed away. Dakota can't bring herself to respond. Overcome, she turns back and retreats into the safety of her home. Elsewhere, near a quiet lake, 3 kids are trying to enjoy what little calm remains. Ron suddenly dives into the water, disappearing beneath the surface. The others call out, worried when there's no immediate response. Just as panic begins to rise, he finally resurfaces. Dee, one of the kids, sighs, disappointed that school will be starting again in just a few days. Ray tries to find a silver lining, pointing out that at least they'll get regular meals again. Their moment doesn't last long. Their foster father, Olsen, storms in, furious to find them lingering near the lake. His harsh tone immediately silences them. When Dee attempts to speak up, the fear in the others keeps her quiet. Olsen's authority is absolute and intimidating. Not far away, a delivery truck pulls up outside a factory. A pregnant veterinarian named Lisa steps out and greets the driver, Bob. He explains that he'll drop off the shipment and then leave town before things get worse. Lisa nods, then gets back in her car, dialing her mother as she drives. On the call, her mother vents frustration about Lisa's fiancé, who abandoned her during pregnancy. She insists Lisa should give birth at home, in water, just like her sister once did. Lisa brushes it off, firmly stating she plans to deliver in a hospital, with her carefully curated playlist ready for the moment. Then the conversation shifts. Her mother mentions that the interstate has already been shut down due to the storm. The question hangs heavy. How is Lisa supposed to leave now? Lisa has no answer. The reality of the situation begins to sink in, and fear starts to take hold. Meanwhile, out near the water, marine biologist Dale, Dakota's uncle, watches the horizon with growing concern. The storm is forming faster than expected. He discusses recent reports with his colleague. Several bull sharks have been spotted unusually close to shore, likely pushed into freshwater by changing conditions. Before they can process it further, a new report comes in. The storm has escalated. It's now officially a Category 5 hurricane. Realizing the urgency, Dale immediately calls Dakota. She answers, but her tone is dismissive. She insists she's staying put, convinced the storm will pass like so many others. Dale tries to reason with her, promising he'll reach her within a couple of hours. Reluctantly, they end the call. Back at the lake, Olsen drags the kids home, continuing his harsh lecture. He threatens to send them back into the foster system if they don't behave. Dee glances around, noticing how people are fleeing the area, clearly frightened. But Olsen shuts down any concern, even switching off the news. To him, it's nothing more than exaggerated panic, just rain. Dakota, however, keeps watching. The broadcast confirms what Dale feared. The storm has intensified far beyond initial predictions. What was once expected to be a Category 2 has rapidly grown into something far more dangerous. Unable to bear it, she switches off the news and plays an old video of herself with her mother. Tears fill her eyes as memories flood back. At Olsen's house, the children nervously question whether the windows will hold against the storm. Olsen confidently assures them they're reinforced, his own work. Down in the basement, he finds his wife Rachel complaining about the kids. She shows him a letter, a monthly check of $1,500 sent by the children's uncle for their care. The two exchange a knowing laugh. Soon after, Dee comes downstairs, hungry. She spots steaks in the fridge, but Olsen quickly shuts her down, making it clear it's not her place to ask. Rachel tosses her a piece of bread instead, dismissing her and reminding her that the basement is strictly off-limits. Elsewhere, as Dale prepares to leave, reporters intercept him, eager for comments about the sharks. They twist his words, sensationalizing the situation for their story. The storm continues to intensify. Lisa arrives at a store, hoping to find supplies, but it's already closed. She calls her mother again, who is now deeply worried. Their conversation is abruptly cut off when the signal drops. Alone and shaken, Lisa turns on her playlist, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Back at Dakota's house, the tension builds. Outside, the wind roars louder, followed by a deep, unsettling crash, then darkness. The power cuts out completely. Moments later, the sea breaches its barrier. A massive surge of water smashes through, flooding the town with unstoppable force. On the road, Lisa encounters Bob again. He urgently warns her. A massive tree has fallen ahead, blocking the way. She needs to turn back. As she processes this, she notices the water rushing toward them. Bob tells her to move quickly to get behind him. Lisa tries to maneuver her car, but the slick road betrays her. The vehicle skids, slamming into the fallen tree, leaving her trapped. Bob makes a desperate attempt to escape. He pushes his truck forward, trying to turn in time, but the incoming surge is too powerful. The water crashes into him, engulfing everything. At the same time, Dakota looks out her window and sees it, the wall of water racing straight toward her home. She barely has time to react. She turns and runs, but the flood breaks in instantly. Inside Olsen's house, he sits on the couch, still dismissive, even as the water barrels toward them. Rachel shouts a warning, but he doesn't move, until the windows shatter and the flood bursts in, sweeping everything away. Dakota is thrown violently by the current. Her car is carried along until it slams into a tree. In the chaos, a jagged log pierces through the vehicle, trapping her, pinning her by her pregnant belly. The water begins to rise slowly inside. Panicked, she screams for help. From nearby, Dakota hears faint cries through the storm, barely audible over the roar of wind and water. Meanwhile, Bob's truck is hurled forward by the current, crashing into a statue with tremendous force, splitting it apart as the flood continues to swallow everything in its path. As blood begins to cloud the water, it spreads quickly, an open invitation to predators lurking nearby. The scent doesn't go unnoticed. Sharks begin circling, drawn in by the chaos. Ron spots something useful, a snorkel sitting on top of a nearby car. Olsen, seeing an opportunity, decides to make a move toward it. Not far away, two men, Scott and Jimmy, are navigating the flooded streets by boat after spotting Bob's truck. Suddenly, Lisa's desperate screams echo across the water. Without hesitation, Scott dives in and swims toward the sound. After a tense search, he finds her trapped inside her car. She tells him she can't move, something has her pinned. Scott calls out to Jimmy, instructing him to grab a cutter from the back of their vehicle. Jimmy climbs down into the water and manages to locate the tool, but when Scott turns to check on him, he's gone. Confused, Scott swims toward where Jimmy disappeared, leaving Lisa alone, her fear intensifying with every second. Then, out of nowhere, Jimmy bursts back up from the water, his arm severed, blood pouring into the flood. Bob regains consciousness just in time to witness the horror. Scott rushes toward Jimmy, trying to help, but before he can do anything, a shark lunges again, dragging Jimmy under for good. From her house, Dakota watches the entire nightmare unfold. Panic grips her as she slams her window shut and screams across the water, warning them there are sharks. Lisa hears her. Bob attempts to open his door to escape, but the moment he does, a shark strikes, attacking him instantly. Scott, now desperate, tries to swim back to safety, but another shark ambushes him from behind, ending his fight within seconds. Everything happens too fast. Back at the research station, Dale and his colleagues scan a map. Half the town is already underwater. The situation is spiraling. With no time to waste, they enlist the help of the reporters nearby and prepare to head out immediately. The reporters, however, are more focused on capturing footage than understanding the danger unfolding around them. Meanwhile, the kids watch from inside as Olsen and Rachel head toward the garage. As they approach, something feels off. Then they see it, a shark gliding just beneath the surface. Despite the warning signs, they open the garage door. The water inside is murky, hiding what's below. Olsen steps forward cautiously, reaching for the door, when suddenly something grabs him. A shark clamps onto his arm, tearing it clean off. Chaos erupts. Before they can react, the same creature lunges again, this time at Rachel, violently dragging her into the water. Olsen, bleeding and panicked, looks back at the kids calling for help, but instead of going to them, he bolts toward the car in a desperate attempt to save himself. He doesn't make it. A shark catches him mid-run and pulls him under. Rachel reappears briefly, slamming against the window as the kids watch helplessly, but she's ripped away again, disappearing beneath the surface for good. Back at the submerged car, Lisa is still trapped, her voice hoarse from screaming. Dakota grabs her phone and calls out to her, trying to guide her through the chaos. Lisa pleads for help, but Dakota hesitates, her voice shaking as she explains she can't reach her. The water is full of sharks. Anyone who tries will be torn apart. Then something unexpected drifts into view, a small floating structure carried by the flood. Lisa asks for Dakota's name. When she hears it, she reveals something deeply personal. She's pregnant. She refuses to let her child die here, not before even taking its first breath. That hits Dakota hard. Overwhelmed, she sinks down, frozen in fear. But after a moment, something shifts. She steadies herself, stands up, and makes a decision. She's going. Carefully, she climbs down from the upper level, stepping across floating furniture to reach the kitchen. She grabs a knife, knowing she'll need it. Then, taking a deep breath, she climbs out through the window. The moment her feet hit the wet tiles, she slips, losing her balance and falling hard onto the submerged car below before sliding into the water. Fighting panic, she pulls herself back up, scrambling over the wreckage. She leaps onto the drifting structure, using it as a platform. Around her, sharks glide silently through the water. Her heart pounds. She spots a set of railings nearby and grabs hold, using them to steady herself. Then, gathering every ounce of courage, she pushes forward, finally reaching Lisa's car. Working quickly, she climbs onto the hood and begins cutting through the debris, trapping Lisa inside. The knife scrapes against branches wedged into the vehicle. After a tense struggle, she manages to break them free. Lisa is finally released. Dakota helps her out of the car and guides her back toward the house. Once inside, Lisa thanks her, her voice trembling, but there's relief now. For the first time, she's safe. Elsewhere, Dale and his partner notice the water levels rising rapidly toward Dakota's location. But what truly unsettles them is something else, a massive shape moving beneath the surface. They recognize it immediately. Nellie. A pregnant great white they've been tracking for 3 years, and now it's here. The kids remain trapped, huddled on top of a table as the water continues to rise around them. Dee decides to shut the door to keep anything else from getting in. She carefully steps across the kitchen counter, inching her way toward it. Just as she reaches the door and tries to close it, 2 sharks slip inside. She freezes. They're right there. She struggles to hold the door, barely keeping it from opening wider. Ron rushes in, grabbing her just before she loses her footing and falls into the water below. At Dakota's house, a heavy log crashes into the structure, weakening it further. She looks out the window and sees the town falling apart piece by piece, buildings collapsing, debris everywhere, the storm showing no mercy. Back inside, the 2 women sit together. Lisa asks Dakota if she's alone. Dakota quietly nods. When asked about her parents, she reveals her father passed away years ago and her mother only recently. Lisa softens, offering a quiet apology. Then comes the question, what now? Dakota doesn't have an answer. Lisa suggests they try reaching the roof. If they can signal for help, maybe a helicopter will spot them. Dakota agrees. But just then Lisa winces, sharp pain cutting through her. The contractions have started. Dakota panics, asking if the baby is coming now. Lisa nods. Thinking quickly, Dakota gathers curtains and ties them together, using them as a rope to climb up to the roof. Once there, she sets up a visible signal, anything that might catch attention from above. Then she climbs back down. Lisa is in worse shape now, the pain intensifying. She asks Dakota to check how far along the labor is. Nervous and unsure, Dakota hesitates, but eventually agrees. Lisa lies back, guiding her through it. Dakota takes a deep breath and checks. She can see something, the baby's head. The opening is only a few inches. Lisa's expression shifts. That's not enough. The baby is coming too soon. Meanwhile, Dale prepares to launch a boat, knowing roads are no longer an option. Communication lines are down, and time is running out. He tells the reporters to leave their equipment behind. The extra weight could cost them everything. Back in the house, the kids notice 2 sharks circling them. Ron realizes they need a distraction, something to draw the sharks away. He decides he has to go to the basement and find weapons. Ray hesitates, reminding him Olsen strictly forbade them from going down there. Ron doesn't care anymore. Olsen is gone. That realization sparks something in all of them. For the first time, they let out everything they've held in, cursing him, releasing their fear and anger. Then something moves. From the water below, Olsen's lifeless body suddenly rises and collapses onto the table in front of them. Dale stays in constant contact with his partner, tracking their position as they push deeper into the flooded town. The situation is worsening by the minute. He makes it clear, if there's even a chance of saving anyone, they need to move fast. There's no room left for hesitation. Night falls. Inside the house, Lisa lies on the bed, breathing heavily as the water level creeps higher around them. The room feels smaller, tighter, like it's closing in. She looks at Dakota and says what both of them already know: they can't stay here. Dakota asks the obvious question, where do they go? Lisa reminds her of the boat. Dakota shakes her head, it's too far. The water between them and that boat is crawling with sharks. It's practically a death sentence. Another contraction hits Lisa, harder this time. Dakota turns toward the window, watching the violent currents surge outside. Fear grips her, but then something shifts. She makes up her mind. She's going. She grabs a flashlight, then pauses, thinking. Lisa asks how she plans to deal with the sharks. Dakota quickly explains her uncle studies them. Sharks respond to movement, to vibrations. She starts searching. Lisa asks for something to dull the pain. Dakota finds painkillers and then something else, an electric toothbrush and a trimmer. An idea sparks. She seals them inside plastic bags, improvising makeshift vibrating decoys. She straps the flashlight to her head with a band, preparing herself. Outside, Dale and the others continue navigating through the flooded streets. He warns them this isn't just dangerous. The great white they've been tracking is massive, bigger than their boat. They pass a floating carcass, a cow torn apart, a grim reminder of what's out there. Back at the house, Dakota drops the vibrating bags into the water one by one. The buzzing begins to echo through the flood. Lisa looks at her, grateful. She thanks her again, quietly, sincerely. Dakota takes one last glance at a photo of her mother. Then she turns and prepares to leave. Elsewhere, Olsen regains consciousness. Disoriented, he asks about Rachel. Ron doesn't sugarcoat it. She didn't survive. Olsen immediately shifts the blame, insisting he had gone out to find help. He tells Ron to do the same, go out there, get assistance. Dee cuts in sharply. There are sharks everywhere. Olsen dismisses it, claiming sharks don't go after kids. At that moment, Ray stumbles upon something shocking, a check. As they look closer, they realize Olsen and Rachel have been receiving $1,500 every month for taking care of them, yet they've been living off scraps while the couple kept the best for themselves. The truth hits hard. Olsen, trying to regain control, threatens them, reminding them he still has one arm left. Ron doesn't back down. He snaps, cursing him outright. Olsen lunges to strike, but before he can, Ron catches his arm. Dee steps in and with all her strength kicks Olsen off balance, sending him crashing into the water below. He surfaces, furious, but only for a moment. A shark strikes, it drags him under, ending everything in seconds. Back outside, Dakota lowers herself into the water. Every movement is careful, controlled. She clings to floating debris, using anything she can to stay above the surface as she inches forward. While the sharks are distracted with Olsen's body, Ron makes his move. He dives into the water and heads straight for the basement. Inside, he grabs the steaks from the fridge, perfect bait. He tries to get to the weapons, but something's wrong, they won't budge. Then he senses it. A shark is closing in. Thinking fast, he grabs a paint bucket and throws it across the room. The splash pulls the shark's attention just long enough for him to slip away, grabbing a box on his way out. He barely makes it back to safety. Inside the house, the water continues to rise. The bed beneath Lisa begins to drift, slowly lifting with the flood. Out in the open water, Dakota keeps moving. The vibrating devices are working for now. The sharks are drawn away from her path. She passes Bob's lifeless body and instinctively changes direction, trying to avoid attracting attention. One by one, the decoys lose power, disappearing into the dark water. Now, there's nothing left between her and the sharks. She freezes, one glides past, close enough to feel. She stays completely still, letting it pass right by her legs. Then she moves. With one final push, she reaches the boat and pulls herself in, gasping for air. Meanwhile, Dale and his team move further into the flooded town. One of the reporters asks what bull sharks fear. Dale answers without hesitation, something bigger than them, and electrical currents can drive them away. Suddenly, communication systems flicker back to life. They scan the area, it's worse than expected. Sharks are everywhere. A damaged SWAT vehicle floats nearby, half submerged. As dawn begins to break, the storm weakens slightly, clouds thinning on the horizon. Dakota swims past a partially destroyed shop and spots something, a crossbow. She grabs it, adding one more layer of defense. Back at the house, Lisa can't hold on any longer. She puts on her playlist, the one she had prepared for this exact moment, and begins pushing. In the basement, Ron opens the box he grabbed. Inside, explosives. An idea forms. Lisa continues, but suddenly, the house gives way. The structure collapses beneath her. She's thrown into the water as everything around her breaks apart. Dakota turns just in time to see it happen. Lisa struggles, then manages to surface, clinging to a floating piece of debris. With sheer determination, she delivers her baby right there in the water. She cradles her newborn, exhausted, but alive. Blood spreads through the water. The sharks are coming. Lisa quickly places the baby safely atop the floating debris. She grabs a sharp, broken piece of wood and cuts the umbilical cord, bracing herself. One shark charges. She strikes, driving the wood into it, forcing it back. She reaches for her child, but another shark is closing in from behind. Dakota reacts instantly. She raises the crossbow and fires, hitting the shark just in time. At the same moment, the kids put their plan into action. They tape the dynamite to the stakes, light it, and toss it into the water. Nothing happens. Ray realizes the problem. It needs movement. He remembers something from TV. Sharks are drawn to vibrations. Without hesitation, they jump into the water and begin splashing. It works. The sharks turn toward the bait. Dee and Ray scramble back onto the table just in time. Ron barely makes it, slipping past danger by inches. Out on the water, Dakota reaches Lisa and the baby. She pulls them toward the boat, but suddenly a shark slams into it, flipping it over completely. Everything goes under. Then Dale arrives. He activates an electronic device and tosses it into the water. A surge of current pulses outward, forcing the sharks back. But before they can recover, one of them lunges again, only to be intercepted mid-attack. The great white, it appears like a force of nature, overpowering the smaller shark instantly. Everyone watches, stunned, as it drags it beneath the surface. The reporter captures everything. Then, an explosion. The dynamite detonates, tearing through the water. The remaining sharks are obliterated. Back at the house, the kids cheer, grabbing each other in relief. Dale pulls Dakota, Lisa, and the baby safely onto the boat. Ray spots the keys nearby, their way out. Dakota wraps her arms around her uncle, overwhelmed with relief. Lisa, trembling but smiling, calls her mother. She shows her the baby, her grandson, safe and alive. The kids find a vehicle and drive through the flooded streets, finally escaping the nightmare. On the boat, the reporters continue broadcasting, talking about how storms like this are only getting stronger with time. Dale looks at Dakota and tells her something she needed to hear. Her mother would be proud, but far out in the ocean, unnoticed by most, Dale's partner sees something chilling. Another storm already beginning to form. There are some movies that win you over with execution, and then there are movies that grab you instantly with nothing but the idea. Thrash belongs to that second category, because the premise alone is enough to make you stop and pay attention. A massive Category 5 hurricane is about to hit a coastal town. Streets are swallowed. Homes become isolated islands. Cars turn into traps. The entire place is overwhelmed by powerful floodwater. And then, as if that wasn't enough, sharks begin moving through the town with the surge. That is the hook. Not sharks in the open ocean. Not sharks circling a boat. Not sharks at the beach. Sharks in neighborhoods. Sharks in houses. Sharks in cars. Sharks turning ordinary suburban space into a high-stakes survival zone. What makes that hook land so effectively is how quickly it rewires your sense of normal space. These are locations the audience understands instinctively. A hallway, a driveway, a kitchen floor, and the film flips their meaning in a single stroke. Suddenly, a doorway isn't an exit, it's a threshold into danger. A staircase isn't a safe route upward, it's a narrowing path where something could be waiting just beneath the surface. That inversion is where the tension really lives, because it's not just about survival anymore, it's about losing the rules that usually make survival possible. And that is exactly why the concept works so well on paper. It takes two familiar fears, natural disaster and predator-driven suspense, and fuses them into one contained survival setup. The hurricane already creates chaos. The flood removes safety. Then the sharks take whatever sense of control was left and completely strip it away. Suddenly, nowhere feels secure. Not the road, not the porch, not even your own living room. And what's clever about that layering is how each element amplifies the other. The storm isn't just background noise, it's constantly feeding the threat, pushing water higher, cutting off escape routes, turning moments of calm into sudden escalation. At the same time, the presence of the sharks means that even stillness becomes dangerous. You're not just waiting out the storm, you're waiting inside it, knowing something could move at any second. That's what makes the premise so immediately cinematic. It doesn't need a long explanation. The image sells itself. A town underwater, people stranded, sharks gliding through spaces that should feel domestic and safe. It's simple, visual, and loaded with tension before the story even really begins. You can already imagine the shots, dimly lit rooms with water lines creeping up the walls, reflections distorting what's beneath the surface, sudden movement breaking that eerie stillness. The film doesn't have to work hard to create atmosphere because the premise is already doing half the job for it. And to the film's credit, it understands that strength early. It gives us multiple survivor threads right away. A heavily pregnant woman stranded at the worst possible moment. A girl trapped in her home, already emotionally vulnerable before the storm even hits. Foster kids stuck in a house that becomes a complete hazard once the flood rises. A rescue figure trying to navigate through the chaos before it's too late. What this does is prevent the story from feeling narrow. Instead of locking us into a single perspective, the film opens up different emotional entry points. Urgency, fear, responsibility, desperation, all unfolding at the same time. It creates a sense that the disaster isn't selective. It's hitting everyone, everywhere, in different ways. So from the beginning, the movie builds the sense that this is not just one isolated shark encounter story. It is a whole town being turned into a disaster zone. That broader setup matters, because the movie isn't built around one creature reveal or one single contained location. It's built around the idea that the storm has transformed an entire environment. The town itself becomes the arena. Every street, every flooded room, every submerged space becomes part of the danger. And that shift in scale changes how you experience the threat. It's no longer about escaping a single situation, it's about surviving a system that keeps closing in on you from every direction. And that gives the film a scale that instantly makes it more exciting than a standard creature feature. There's a sense of unpredictability baked into it because the danger isn't centralized. It can appear anywhere. One moment you're dealing with rising water, the next you're dealing with something moving beneath it. That constant instability is what keeps the premise engaging even before the narrative complications kick in. There's also something very effective about the way the premise plays with contrast. Hurricanes are already terrifying because they strip away structure. Sharks are intimidating because they turn water into a constant threat. Put those two things together, and the film taps into a very basic fear. Once the world around you changes, everything familiar can become dangerous. And that idea goes beyond spectacle. It hits something psychological. It's about disorientation, about not being able to trust your environment anymore, about realizing that safety was always conditional, and now those conditions are gone. That's a strong foundation for a survival thriller. And honestly, that's the biggest reason Thrash remains interesting even when other parts of it struggle. The concept is just that strong. It has that perfect B-movie elegance, easy to understand, easy to market, and instantly able to spark the imagination. You hear flooded town with sharks, and your brain immediately starts building scenes before the movie even shows them to you. You start anticipating encounters, imagining close calls, picturing how characters might navigate spaces that were never meant to be navigated this way. That built-in anticipation is incredibly valuable because it means the audience is already engaged before the film has to prove itself. That's the power of a high-concept premise. It creates anticipation on its own. It gives the film momentum before the first major set piece even unfolds. It invites the audience to participate mentally, to fill in the gaps, to project possibilities onto the screen. And when a movie can do that, it's already halfway to holding your attention. So even before we talk about the execution, the characters, the suspense, or the logic, Thrash already has one major thing working in its favor. It knows how to sell itself, and in a genre like this, that matters a lot, because if the idea doesn't excite you, nothing else will save it. But here, the idea absolutely does. It's bold in its simplicity, and that simplicity is exactly what makes it stick. Every shark movie lives in the shadow of something, and whether it likes it or not, Thrash walks straight into a legacy it can't escape. Because the moment you see sharks moving through a flooded town, your brain starts making connections automatically. You think of Jaws, the blueprint, the one that defined tension, restraint, and fear in this genre. The one every shark movie is still chasing decades later. But Thrash isn't trying to be that. It's not built on restraint or slow-burn dread. It's built on escalation and spectacle. What it's actually closer to is a hybrid, a collision of two modern genre lanes. On one side, you've got disaster-driven survival like Crawl, where rising water traps characters in a confined space with a predator. On the other side, you've got high-concept creature chaos like Bait, where sharks invade unexpected environments. And Thrash basically says, why not combine both, flood the entire town, let the sharks in, and turn everything into a danger zone. On paper, that's a smart evolution. It expands the playground. It takes the contained tension of something like Crawl and scales it into something bigger, more chaotic, more wide-reaching. This isn't one basement filling with water. This is an entire community being pulled into it. And that expansion opens the door for variety, different locations, different survival strategies, different types of encounters that keep the premise from feeling repetitive. But here's where the comparisons start working against the film. Because when you bring up Crawl, you're immediately reminded of how tight that movie is, how controlled it feels, how it builds tension and never really lets go. There's a precision to the way it escalates, every moment feeding directly into the next, every decision carrying weight. And when you look back at Thrash through that lens, you start noticing the gaps, the looseness. The moments where tension should be tightening, but instead it plateaus. Scenes that feel like they're building towards something, only to resolve too quickly or without that lingering sense of danger. It's not that the threat disappears, it's that it doesn't always evolve. And in a survival thriller, that evolution is what keeps the audience locked in. Then there's the broader shark movie landscape. You've got Deep Blue Sea, which leans into intelligence and unpredictability, constantly shifting the rules so the audience never feels fully secure. You've got The Shallows, stripped down, focused, survival-driven, where every movement feels calculated and every second matters. You've got The Meg, big, loud, spectacle-heavy, fully embracing scale and delivering on that promise. And then you've got the complete opposite end with Sharknado, pure absurdity, fully aware of itself, leaning so hard into its concept that it becomes the point. And Thrash sits somewhere awkwardly in between all of them. It's not as disciplined as The Shallows, where minimalism becomes the tension. Not as intense as Crawl, where every second feels like a ticking clock. Not as polished as The Meg, where spectacle is the main attraction. And not as unapologetically over the top as Sharknado, where the chaos is the entire appeal. It hovers in that middle ground, trying to be a serious survival thriller while occasionally slipping into something much more heightened and self-aware. And that tonal balancing act is where things start to feel uncertain. You can sense the film pulling in different directions, never quite deciding how grounded or how exaggerated it wants to be. And that's where audience reactions start to split, because depending on what you expect from a shark movie, Thrash can feel very different. If you're coming in hoping for something grounded and tense, something that builds fear the way the best in the genre do, this might feel like a weaker imitation. A film that borrows the structure but doesn't quite deliver the same impact. The kind of experience where you're constantly aware of what it's trying to do, but not fully feeling it. But if you're coming in as a fan of the genre's more chaotic side, the sharks in unexpected places energy, then this might land closer to fun. Not because it's doing something new, but because it's remixing familiar elements in a way that's easy to enjoy without overthinking it. And that's really what defines Thrash in the bigger picture. It's not trying to reinvent the genre. It's not trying to outdo the classics. It's not even trying to be the best version of what already exists. It's taking pieces from everything that came before, the tension of survival films, the chaos of creature features, the scale of disaster movies, and blending them into something that sits right in the middle. You can almost feel the influence of each type of film layered into its structure, like it's assembling a version of the genre rather than refining one specific direction. The problem is that middle ground is a difficult place to be. Because in a genre this crowded, you either need to be sharper or bolder. You need either precision that elevates familiar ideas or a creative push that makes them stand out. And Thrash never fully commits to being either. It flirts with intensity but doesn't sustain it. It hints at chaos but doesn't fully embrace it. And as a result, it risks feeling like it's holding back when it should be leaning in. Let's be honest, within the first 15 minutes, you already know exactly what kind of movie this is. Not because it tells you outright, but because you've seen this structure before. A massive storm is coming. Warnings are ignored. A handful of people stay behind for very specific, very convenient reasons. A pregnant woman, a grieving girl, a group of vulnerable kids, a rescue figure racing against time, and once the flood hits, you can already map out the rhythm. Who's in danger? Who's going to make it through? Who's likely not making it out? The film doesn't try to disguise these patterns. It leans into them, almost trusting that familiarity will carry the experience. That's where Thrash leans heavily into formula. It doesn't just borrow from the shark genre, it builds itself out of it. You can feel the DNA of past films in almost every scene. The setup, the character archetypes, the escalation beats, it's all familiar territory. And because of that, there's very little friction between what the film is doing and what the audience expects. Everything moves along a path that feels predetermined, like it's following a blueprint rather than discovering its own direction. And to be fair, that's not automatically a bad thing, because genre filmmaking has always thrived on patterns. There's a reason these tropes exist. They work. They're efficient. They give the audience something recognizable to hold onto. They create a shared language between the film and the viewer. And when they're used well, they can still feel exciting, even if you've seen them before, because it's not about the structure itself, but how creatively you move within it. But here's the problem. Thrash doesn't just use the formula, it rarely rises above it. The characters often feel like they're fulfilling roles rather than becoming people. You understand what they represent more than who they are. The story moves exactly where you expect it to, beat by beat, without much deviation. Even the danger follows a predictable rhythm: setup, pause, encounter, escape, repeat. And once you start noticing that pattern, it becomes hard to ignore, because instead of being pulled into the tension, you start anticipating the mechanics behind it. There's no real sense of surprise. No moment where the film completely flips expectations. No sequence that makes you go, okay, I didn't see that coming. And in a genre built on tension and unpredictability, that absence becomes noticeable. The film gives you exactly what you think it will give you, nothing more, nothing less. Instead, you get something else entirely. A movie that feels like it's remixing pieces of other shark and disaster films into a single package. Almost like it took all the familiar ingredients, storm, trapped survivors, rising water, predators, and assembled them into a checklist. Each element is there, each beat is hit, but rarely does it feel like those elements are being pushed into something uniquely its own. And yet, here's the twist. That same predictability is also part of why some people enjoy it. Because if you go into Thrash expecting originality, you'll probably walk away disappointed. But if you go into it expecting a comfort zone genre ride, something that hits all the beats you already know, then it becomes easier to sit back and just go with it. There's a certain ease to that experience. You're not constantly trying to figure out what's next because you already have a sense of it. You know the structure, you know the stakes, you know how it's going to play out. And sometimes that familiarity becomes part of the fun. It's like watching a classic formula unfold in a new setting, not because it's fresh, but because it's comfortable. There's a rhythm to it that feels recognizable, almost reassuring in its predictability. You're not trying to solve the movie. You're not waiting for it to surprise you. You're just watching it execute a pattern you already understand and seeing how well it can deliver within those boundaries. The issue is, for every viewer who finds that comforting, there's another who finds it frustrating. Because in a genre that's already crowded with similar ideas, playing it this safe can make a film feel forgettable, not weak enough to stand out, not original enough to leave a mark, just another entry in the cycle. And that kind of middle-tier identity is often the hardest thing for a film to escape, because it doesn't give the audience anything to hold on to after it's over. There's no defining moment, no signature sequence, no bold creative choice that separates it from everything else sitting next to it. It blends in, and in a genre built on heightened stakes and memorable tension, blending in is almost the worst outcome. And that's exactly where Thrash lands. It doesn't reinvent the formula. It doesn't challenge it. It doesn't elevate it. It simply follows it, and whether that works for you depends entirely on what you're looking for. If you want something new, you won't find it here. But if you just want to watch the formula play out one more time, Thrash is more than willing to give you exactly that. It becomes less about discovery and more about familiarity, less about impact and more about repetition. This is where Thrash starts to seriously fall apart, because once you get past the premise, once the flood hits, once the sharks are in play, you start asking one simple question. Wait, why is that happening? And the problem is, the movie rarely has a satisfying answer. It's not just that things feel unlikely, it's that they often feel unsupported. Moments occur without the groundwork that would make them convincing, and as a result, the film starts to feel like it's skipping steps in its own logic. Now look, this is a shark disaster movie. Nobody is expecting scientific perfection. You can bend reality, you can heighten danger, you can even stretch logic a little if it serves tension, but you still need internal consistency. You need rules, and more importantly, you need to follow those rules. Because once a film establishes how its world works, the audience starts playing along with it. They accept the premise, they accept the exaggeration, but only if it remains consistent. That's the unspoken agreement, and once that agreement is broken, everything else starts to wobble. That's where Thrash struggles. The film constantly tells you one thing, and then shows you something completely different. You have a shark expert explaining how sharks behave, and then the very next sequence contradicts it. And it's not a subtle contradiction, it's the kind that makes you question whether the film even remembers what it just established. You have characters tracking danger, but somehow still unable to locate it when it matters most, as if awareness itself turns on and off depending on the scene. You have situations where survival decisions feel less like human instinct and more like the story guiding people into the next set piece. And once you notice that pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore, because the story doesn't feel like it's unfolding naturally. It feels like it's being pushed from one moment to the next. There's a mechanical quality to the progression, where scenes exist because the structure requires them, not because they emerge organically from what came before. And that disconnect starts to erode the illusion the film is trying to build. Characters don't always act based on logic, they act based on what the scene needs. Stay downstairs instead of going up, split up when you shouldn't, ignore obvious danger. It happens again and again. And what makes it more noticeable is that these aren't subtle lapses. They're decisions that feel designed to create risk rather than respond to it. The characters stop feeling like participants in the situation and start feeling like pieces moving through it. And instead of building tension, it starts doing the opposite. It breaks immersion, because tension comes from belief. You don't need realism, but you need to believe that within this world, things make sense. That cause leads to effect. That danger behaves in a way you can understand, even if it's heightened. You need to feel like if you were in that situation, the outcome would follow the same logic. That's what allows fear to take hold. But here, the rules keep shifting. Sharks appear and disappear based on convenience. Threat levels fluctuate without explanation. Information is introduced, then abandoned. Even major moments that should carry weight, just happen and then move on without payoff. And when payoff disappears, so does impact. Because without consequence, nothing really lands. And that's the real issue. It's not just that things don't make sense, it's that the movie doesn't seem concerned with whether they make sense. It's more focused on getting to the next moment, the next encounter, the next escape, the next dramatic beat, than making sure the journey between those moments holds together. It prioritizes momentum over coherence, but without coherence, that momentum starts to feel hollow. And because of that, the story starts to feel thin, not because nothing is happening, but because everything feels disconnected. Scene to scene, decision to decision, cause to effect, you're not watching a chain of events that build into something. You're watching events happening one after another, and that difference is huge. Because a chain creates tension, it builds anticipation, it makes every moment feel like it's leading somewhere. But a sequence of isolated events, that just creates noise, because once the logic breaks, the tension follows. And once the tension fades, all you're left with is spectacle without weight, moments without meaning, and a story that never quite holds together the way it should. You might still react to what's happening in the moment, but it doesn't stay with you. It doesn't accumulate. This is the heart of the movie. And unfortunately, it's also where Thrash feels the most inconsistent, because everything about this setup should be intense. You've got rising floodwater swallowing an entire town. You've got people trapped in houses, cars, and isolated pockets of safety. And moving through all of that, you've got sharks. That combination should create constant tension, not occasional tension, not situational tension. Constant pressure, the kind where every step matters, every sound matters, every movement feels like a risk. And to be fair, there are moments where the film almost gets there. There are scenes where you feel it. That hesitation before a character moves, that awareness that something could be just beneath the surface, that brief moment where the film taps into what it should be doing the entire time. In those flashes, you see the version of the movie that could have been, one where the environment itself becomes suffocating, where the threat is always present even when it's not visible. But those moments don't last. Because the biggest issue here isn't that the movie lacks danger, it's that the danger doesn't feel unpredictable, and unpredictability is the lifeblood of suspense. Without it, even the most intense situation starts to feel manageable. Very early on, the film starts showing its hand. You begin to understand who is safe, who has protection, who the story is going to carry through no matter what happens, and once that becomes clear, the stakes drop immediately. Because the moment you can predict survival, the tension collapses, because real suspense comes from uncertainty. It comes from not knowing who might make it through, not knowing when something will strike, not knowing if a situation is truly escapable. It comes from the feeling that anything could happen and that no one is guaranteed to make it out. But here, a lot of the encounter sequences feel expected. You can see them coming. You can feel the rhythm, setup, pause, something shifts, confrontation, escape. And once that pattern locks in, the tension starts to fade. It doesn't matter how dangerous the situation looks. If you already know how it's going to play out, it stops being suspenseful. It becomes routine, and routine is the enemy of fear, especially in a film that depends so heavily on anticipation. Because once the audience starts predicting the beats instead of reacting to them, the experience shifts from immersive to mechanical. That predictability also affects how you read the scene moment to moment. Instead of focusing on what could happen, you start focusing on when it will happen. You're waiting for the cue, the sound, the movement, the inevitable confrontation. And once that waiting replaces uncertainty, the tension flattens out. It's no longer about danger unfolding unpredictably, it's about a sequence playing out on schedule. That's especially noticeable in some of the film's most promising scenarios. You've got characters trapped inside flooded houses, sharks moving through rooms that should feel safe, tight, enclosed spaces where escape should feel nearly impossible. That's prime material for unforgettable sequences. Spaces where visibility is limited, where movement is restricted, where every decision carries immediate consequence. You could build entire sequences around hesitation alone, characters testing the water, listening for movement, trying to read an environment that no longer behaves the way it should. But instead of pushing those moments to their limits, the film often pulls back. It doesn't fully explore the geography of those spaces. It doesn't stretch the silence or let the uncertainty linger long enough to become overwhelming. It moves through them quickly, hitting the necessary beats but not deepening them. And when you rush through a situation that should feel suffocating, you lose the very thing that makes it effective. And when you combine that with the low sense of consequence, the relatively small impact of encounters, and the visible narrative protection around key characters, the stakes never fully lock in. You start to recognize who the film is shielding, who it's willing to put in danger and who it isn't. And once that becomes clear, the illusion of risk starts to fade. Because if the outcome feels predetermined, then the journey there loses its edge. You're watching danger, but you're not feeling it. And that distinction is critical, because visual threat and emotional threat are not the same thing. You can show something dangerous on screen, but if the audience doesn't believe it can truly go wrong, the impact stays surface level. It becomes spectacle instead of suspense. Now, to be fair, not everyone experiences it the same way. Some viewers do find certain scenes tense. Some moments do create that edge-of-your-seat feeling, even if briefly. And for those viewers, the pacing and constant movement are enough to keep things engaging. The film doesn't linger. It keeps pushing forward, giving you just enough stimulation to stay invested on a moment-to-moment basis. But for others, and this is where the criticism hits strongest, the film never reaches that level of sustained suspense it promises. It never becomes the relentless survival experience the premise demands. It doesn't build pressure and hold it. It releases it too quickly, too often. And without that sustained pressure, the experience never fully tightens. Instead, it stays in this middle ground, not fully intense, not fully chaotic. Just controlled enough to move forward, but not overwhelming enough to truly grip you. It feels like it's constantly hovering just below the level it needs to reach, never quite committing to pushing the audience into that uncomfortable space where tension becomes all-consuming. And that's the key difference, because in a movie like this, danger shouldn't just exist, it should dominate the experience. It should feel like the characters are barely holding on, like every decision could be their last. It should create a constant sense of instability, where even small movements feel risky. But in Thrash, the danger is there, the sharks are there, the situations are there. What's missing is the feeling that any of it could truly go wrong. There's a layer of safety beneath the chaos, and once you sense that, the intensity starts to slip away. On paper, this structure should make the movie bigger. Multiple survivor groups, different locations, different types of danger unfolding at the same time. You've got the pregnant woman stranded outside a house. You've got Dakota trapped inside, dealing with her own isolation and fear. You've got the foster kids trying to survive in a completely different environment. And then you've got the rescue thread trying to connect all of it. That kind of setup usually works because it gives the film scope. It allows the disaster to feel widespread, affecting people in different ways simultaneously. Because when you intercut between multiple storylines, you can build scale. You can show that this isn't just one isolated incident. This is a full-scale crisis affecting everyone differently. You can raise tension by jumping between situations, letting one scenario breathe while another escalates. Ideally, each thread feeds into the others, creating a rhythm where tension compounds rather than resets. That's the idea. But in Thrash, the execution doesn't quite hold together. Instead of feeling like one expanding story, it often feels like separate stories running side by side. And that distinction matters, because instead of building toward a unified experience, the film starts to feel divided. The biggest example is the split between the Lisa Dakota storyline and the foster kids storyline. Individually, both have potential. Both have strong setups. Both could carry their own version of this movie. Each one taps into a different kind of vulnerability, a different kind of survival dynamic. But together, they don't fully connect. They don't build off each other. They don't emotionally reinforce each other. They just coexist. And because of that, the film starts to feel fragmented, almost like two shorter films stitched together into one feature. You jump from one group to another, but instead of tension building, it sometimes resets. You leave one dangerous situation just as it's getting interesting, switch to another, and then repeat the process. So instead of escalation, you get interruption, and that's a big difference. Because a strong multi-thread narrative should feel like everything is tightening at once, like all roads are leading towards something bigger. The tension should stack, not restart. Each cut should increase pressure, not relieve it. But here, the threads don't always feel like they're moving toward a shared peak. They feel like parallel tracks, running at the same time, but not converging in a way that amplifies their impact. And without that convergence, the overall experience loses momentum, and that affects how you connect with the story. There's no single emotional anchor, no one perspective that fully carries the film, no clear center that everything revolves around, so your attention keeps shifting. And while that can create variety, it also makes it harder to stay fully invested in any one storyline. You're constantly readjusting, constantly re-engaging, rather than being pulled deeper into a single, continuous arc. Now, to be fair, some viewers actually enjoy this structure. They like the variety. They like seeing different survival scenarios. They like the idea that the entire town is experiencing chaos in different ways. And when the pacing is fast, that constant switching can keep things moving, preventing the film from feeling stagnant. But the downside is clear, because when the film cuts away at the wrong moment, when it leaves tension behind instead of building on it, you start to feel the gaps. You start to feel the disconnect. The rhythm breaks, the immersion slips. And instead of one intense, unified experience, You get pieces of intensity, spread across different threads, never fully combining into something greater. Moments that work on their own but don't accumulate into something lasting. That's the core issue. The structure isn't broken, but it isn't fully optimized either. It has all the right components, multiple perspectives, parallel danger, cross-cut tension, but it never quite aligns them into a single, powerful flow. And what that creates is a film that feels like it's constantly almost working at its full potential, without ever quite reaching it. You can see the intention behind the design. You can see how it's supposed to function. But the pieces never fully lock together in a way that amplifies each other. And in a movie that relies so heavily on momentum, that lack of cohesion makes a difference. Because momentum isn't just about moving forward, it's about how smoothly everything connects as it moves. It's about whether each moment pushes the next one higher or simply replaces it. And here it often feels like replacement rather than progression. If there's one thing Thrash understands, it's that this kind of movie cannot afford to drag, and to its credit, it doesn't. This is a fast movie. It gets in, sets up the situation, throws you into the storm, and keeps moving. There's very little downtime, very little lingering. It knows the premise is the selling point, and it wastes no time putting that premise into motion. There's a sense of urgency baked into the pacing from the very beginning, and that works in its favor because hesitation would have weakened the energy almost immediately. That works in its favor, because in a film like this, momentum is everything. The audience isn't here for slow introspection or extended setup. They're here to see the concept unfold. And the film delivers on that quickly, making sure you're in the middle of the chaos before you have time to question it. The short runtime plays a huge role here too. At around an hour and a half, maybe even less depending on how you count it, the film avoids one of the biggest mistakes these types of movies make, overstaying its welcome. There isn't enough story here for 2 hours, and thankfully, the movie seems to know that. It doesn't try to stretch thin material into something larger than it is. It doesn't pad itself with unnecessary detours or filler sequences. It keeps things lean, so instead of stretching itself thin, it keeps things tight. It moves quickly from setup to chaos, from chaos to survival, and from survival to resolution. And for a lot of viewers, that alone makes it watchable. There's a certain efficiency to it that keeps the experience from feeling exhausting or repetitive. It knows when to move on, even if it doesn't always know how to deepen what it's leaving behind. But here's where things get complicated. Because fast pacing doesn't always mean effective pacing. Speed can carry a film, but it can also flatten it if it replaces development instead of supporting it. And that's where Thrash starts to show cracks, the first act. That's where the pacing feels the strongest. There's a clear build-up. There's a countdown to impact. There's tension in the anticipation of what's coming. You're being introduced to characters, to situations, to emotional stakes, and it all feels like it's building towards something. There's a sense of direction, a sense that each moment is preparing the next. That's controlled pacing. It gives the film a foundation to stand on. But once the storm hits, the film shifts gears. And instead of controlled escalation, it starts relying on constant movement. Things just keep happening, scene after scene, crisis after crisis, jumping from one storyline to another. And while that keeps the movie from feeling slow, it also starts to affect how those moments land. Because when everything is happening all the time, nothing has the space to fully register. Because escalation isn't just about speed. It's about build and release. It's about letting tension grow, peak, and then hit. It's about contrast, quiet moments that make intense moments hit harder, pauses that make action feel more impactful. But here, the film often skips the build. It moves straight to the payoff without fully earning it. It moves so quickly that moments don't always have time to fully develop. Scenes arrive, play out, and move on before they can leave a lasting impression. And then we get to the final stretch. This is where a lot of viewers start to feel the pacing slip, not because it slows down, but because it speeds up in the wrong way. The last act feels rushed. Not in a dull sense, but in a compressed sense. It's like the film suddenly becomes aware of its own runtime and starts condensing everything it has left into a shorter window. It's like the movie suddenly realizes how much it still needs to wrap up and starts pushing through major developments without giving them the weight they need. Big moments happen quickly. Resolutions come fast. Escalation turns into exaggeration, and instead of building toward a powerful climax, it starts to feel like the film is racing to finish rather than arriving there naturally. That creates a strange imbalance. Because earlier, the film moves quickly in a way that feels efficient. Later, it moves quickly in a way that feels hurried. And that difference is subtle, but important. One feels intentional, the other feels reactive. Now, not everyone sees it as a problem. Some viewers actually appreciate this. They like that the movie never slows down. They like that it doesn't overthink itself. They like that it just keeps presenting situations and moves on. For them, the pacing becomes part of the film's identity, fast, relentless, always in motion. But for others, that same speed comes at a cost, because when you don't give moments time to breathe, you lose impact, you lose tension, you lose emotional weight, you lose the sense that anything is building towards something meaningful. Everything becomes immediate, but nothing becomes lasting, and that's really the key takeaway here. Thrash is paced like a movie that knows it has a great idea, but isn't always sure how to fully develop it. So instead of slowing down and deepening the experience, it keeps moving forward. It prioritizes momentum over meaning. And while that keeps the film watchable, it also keeps it from ever becoming truly powerful. For a movie built on survival, this is where everything should matter the most, because sharks are only half the equation. The other half is who's trying to survive them, and survival only becomes compelling when you care about the people involved, when their struggle feels personal, not just situational. And early on, Thrash actually gives you something to hold onto. You've got a pregnant woman stuck in the worst possible situation, already vulnerable before the disaster even begins. You've got Dakota, isolated, grieving, emotionally fragile before the storm hits. You've got foster kids trapped in a house where the danger isn't just outside, it's already inside. There's loss, there's anxiety, there's neglect, there's pressure. All the ingredients are there, and for a moment, it feels like the movie understands that. The opening does just enough to sketch these people as more than just victims. You get glimpses of their lives, their struggles, their emotional state before everything collapses, and that's important, because those glimpses are what should anchor the chaos that follows. Because when a survival movie works, it's not just about escaping danger, it's about watching people change under pressure. It's about seeing fear turn into instinct, hesitation turn into action, vulnerability turn into resilience. The external threat is only half the story. The internal shift is what gives that threat meaning. And when both of those elements evolve together, that's when a survival film really starts to land. But here's where the film starts to lose that thread. Once the sharks take over, the characters stop developing. They don't evolve, they don't deepen, they don't really change in meaningful ways. The storm escalates, the danger escalates, but the people at the center of it stay mostly the same. And that creates a disconnect because the environment is transforming constantly, but the emotional core isn't keeping up. They move from one situation to another, from one danger to the next. And instead of becoming more layered, they become more functional. Their choices become reactive rather than reflective. They respond to what's happening, but they're not shaped by it in a way that feels cumulative. There's no real sense that each experience is leaving a mark, that each close call is altering how they think, how they act, how they survive. They exist to get through the next scene, to react, to survive, to push the plot forward. And because of that, emotional investment starts to fade. Because if the characters aren't changing, the stakes don't feel like they're increasing, they just feel like they're repeating. Now, this is where reactions split. Some viewers still find enough to care about. They connect with the leads. They appreciate that the kids aren't irritating. They find certain moments, especially early on, genuinely engaging. And to be fair, the film does give you just enough groundwork for that to happen. There are glimpses of personality, glimpses of vulnerability, hints at something deeper that could have been explored further. But for others, the characters never go beyond surface level. They feel like types: the pregnant survivor, the traumatized girl, the troubled kids, the rescuer. You understand them, but you don't fully feel them. And that difference matters because understanding creates distance, while feeling creates connection. And this film never quite bridges that gap. And then there's the biggest issue affecting all of this: narrative protection. Once it becomes clear who the movie is safeguarding, the emotional stakes drop, because survival stops being uncertain. You're no longer asking, will they make it? You're asking, how will the story get them through this? And that shift changes everything. Because real emotional investment comes from risk, from the feeling that anything could happen, that no one is guaranteed safety, that decisions have consequences that can't be undone. But here, that uncertainty fades quickly. The film signals its intentions early, and once you pick up on those signals, the tension starts to soften. And when it does, the characters lose weight, not because they're poorly acted, but because the story never truly places them in situations that feel irreversible. They're in danger, but not in a way that feels final. The threat surrounds them, but it doesn't fully shape the narrative in a way that forces lasting change. That said, the cast does a lot of heavy lifting. There are performances here that are genuinely solid. Whitney stands out for many. Phoebe Dynevor brings presence and commitment. Even the younger cast holds their own surprisingly well. And when the actors are working, you can feel the version of this movie that could have been stronger, the one where character and survival actually grow together, where the performances are supported by writing that gives them room to evolve. But the script doesn't fully support them. It gives them a starting point and then stops building. It sets up emotional threads without fully developing them. It introduces vulnerability without fully exploring it. And as a result, the performances have to carry more than they should, trying to fill in gaps that the narrative leaves open. So what you're left with is this: characters that are introduced with potential, performed with effort, but never fully realized. They feel like beginnings without endings, like setups without payoff. And in a movie like this, that matters more than anything. Because when you don't fully care who makes it through, it becomes a lot easier to just watch the chaos unfold without feeling any of it. You're observing rather than experiencing, and that emotional distance is hard to overcome once it sets in. If there's one area where Thrash manages to stay afloat more consistently, it's the cast. Because even when the writing starts to wobble, the performances don't completely fall with it, and that matters. In a movie where the logic is shaky, the tension is inconsistent, and the characters aren't always fully developed, the actors become the last line of support. They're the ones grounding scenes. They're the ones trying to sell moments that the script doesn't always support. They're the ones adding nuance where the writing simplifies things, and for the most part, they do a solid job of holding that line. Whitney Peak is one of the standout presences here. There's a natural emotional weight to her performance, especially in the earlier parts of the film, where the character actually has room to breathe. She brings a sense of internal conflict that feels genuine, not forced. Even in quieter moments, there's something working beneath the surface, something that suggests a deeper emotional state than the script fully explores. Phoebe Dynevor also brings commitment to a role that could have easily felt one-dimensional. The situation she's placed in is extreme, even by this movie's standards, but she leans into it with enough sincerity that you buy into the moment, even when the scenario itself stretches believability. She treats the stakes seriously, and that seriousness helps anchor scenes that might otherwise feel exaggerated. And then there's Djimon Hounso. He's probably the most grounded presence in the entire film, the one character who feels like he's operating with some level of logic and purpose. There's a calm authority to his performance, a sense that he understands the situation in a way others don't. When he's on screen, there's a shift. The chaos feels more structured. The decisions feel more deliberate. There's a sense of stability, like the movie briefly remembers how real people might actually behave in a situation like this. The reactions feel measured. The stakes feel clearer. The world feels more believable. The problem: he's barely in it, and that's frustrating, because you can feel the potential of that character, the one who could have anchored the film, tied the storylines together, and given the chaos some structure. The one who could have acted as a bridge between the different threads, providing a consistent perspective in a story that often feels scattered. But instead, he's underused, and the movie loses that grounding presence for long stretches. And without that anchor, the film drifts more easily into inconsistency, both in tone and in logic. Beyond that, the supporting cast is mixed, not weak, not standout, just functional. Some actors bring energy, some feel a bit flat. Some are clearly doing the best they can with limited material. And in many cases, the performances are less about range and more about survival, reacting to what's happening rather than driving it. But here's the key thing: very few performances actually hurt the movie. Even critics of the film tend to agree on that. The issue isn't that the actors are falling short, it's that the material isn't giving them enough to work with. And no matter how strong a performance is, it can only go so far without a script that allows it to grow. Because no matter how capable an actor is, if the character stops evolving, if the dialogue feels thin, if the decisions don't make sense, there's only so much they can do. At a certain point, performance hits a ceiling. You can add nuance, you can add presence, you can add emotional texture, but you can't create depth where the script refuses to build it. And that limitation becomes more visible the longer the film goes on. And that's exactly what happens here. You've got a cast that's capable, a few standout performances, some genuinely strong moments early on. But as the film shifts more into action and spectacle, the performances become secondary. They're no longer shaping the experience, they're being carried by it. The focus moves away from who these people are and toward what's happening around them. And once that shift happens, the emotional layer starts to thin out. They're no longer driving the experience, they're reacting to it. And reaction, on its own, can only go so far. Without progression, without internal change, it becomes repetitive. Fear looks the same. Urgency feels the same. The emotional beats start to blur together because nothing is evolving beneath them, and that's the missed opportunity. Because with a stronger script, this same cast could have elevated the film significantly. They had the presence, they had the tone, they had the ability to ground even the more exaggerated elements. You can see it in flashes, moments where the performance almost pushes the scene into something more believable, more engaging, more human. But those moments don't stack. They don't build into something larger. Instead, they're left holding together something that never fully supports them. They're compensating rather than collaborating with the material, trying to bring weight to scenes that aren't written to carry it. And while that effort is noticeable, it's not enough to fully bridge the gap. So in the end, the performances do what they can. They keep the movie watchable. They give certain scenes credibility. They provide just enough emotional weight to carry you through. They stop the film from completely disconnecting, but they're not enough to overcome everything else. And that's the difference between a cast that supports a film and a cast that saves it. Thrash lands somewhere in between. It leans on its actors, but doesn't give them the foundation to truly lift the film higher. This is where Thrash walks a very fine line, because visually, it's not a disaster. But it's also not strong enough to fully elevate the experience. It sits right in that middle ground, where some things work and others remind you exactly what kind of movie you're watching. Let's start with the positives. The sharks themselves, they actually look decent, not groundbreaking, not unsettling on the level of Jaws where suggestion and restraint created lasting impact, but for a modern mid-tier creature feature, they hold up. There's enough detail. Enough weight, enough movement to sell the illusion in most scenes. They feel present in the environment, even if they don't always feel unpredictable within it. The film is smart enough, at times, to not overexpose them, keeping them partially hidden, using quick glimpses, silhouettes, motion in the water. And that helps because when you show too much, too clearly, that's when the illusion starts to fade. Suggestion often carries more power than clarity, especially in a setting where visibility is already compromised. And in those moments, the film taps into that idea effectively. The flood environments also do some heavy lifting. There are moments where the water, the submerged streets, the confined spaces, it all feels visually engaging. You get that sense of disorientation, that idea that the environment itself has become unstable. Lines between spaces blur, depth becomes harder to judge, movement becomes uncertain, and in those moments, the movie looks good enough to support its premise. You feel the potential of the setting doing its job, but then the cracks start to show. You begin to notice the artificiality. Certain scenes feel too clean, too controlled, too perfectly lit for what should be chaos. Storm conditions that don't feel intense enough. Floodwater that doesn't always feel threatening enough. Outdoor scenes where everything looks just a little too polished, as if the environment is being presented rather than experienced. And then there's the green screen, not everywhere, but enough to be noticeable. Some shots pull you out immediately. Some backgrounds feel disconnected from the actors. Some moments lose their physical weight because you can tell they're not fully grounded in a real space. And once you see that, it's hard to unsee. It breaks that thin line between immersion and observation. The cinematography itself is also inconsistent. At times, there are solid shot choices, angles that emphasize danger, framing that works within confined spaces, movement that keeps scenes dynamic. You get glimpses of intentional visual storytelling, where the camera placement actually enhances the tension, but then you get moments that feel flat, or oddly staged, or visually disconnected from the tone the movie is trying to create. It's not cohesive. It doesn't build a strong, unified visual identity. Instead, it feels like a mix of good decisions and rushed ones. Moments where the film knows exactly how to present itself, followed by moments where it feels like it's simply covering the action without shaping it. Now, to be fair, this isn't a big-budget spectacle, and within its range, it does enough. It never completely falls apart visually. It never becomes unwatchable, and in key moments, it delivers exactly what it needs to. It gives you just enough to maintain the illusion, but it also never goes beyond that. It doesn't enhance the tension. It doesn't deepen the immersion. It doesn't create a visual experience that stays with you. It supports the film, but it doesn't elevate it, and that's the key difference. Because in a movie built on atmosphere, on water, darkness, movement, and unseen danger, the technical execution needs to pull you in completely. It needs to make you feel like you're inside that environment, not just looking at it. The visuals need to work in harmony with the tension, reinforcing it, amplifying it. But here, you're watching it, not fully inside it, and that slight distance is enough to affect how everything lands, because immersion is fragile. Once it breaks, even slightly, the experience starts to feel less immediate, and that's why the visuals land where they do. Good enough to keep you engaged, not strong enough to make the movie feel real. And in a story like this, that missing layer of immersion makes a difference. If you strip this movie down to its core, this is what it's selling you: sharks, floodwater, people trapped in extreme situations. So the real question becomes, do the set pieces deliver? And the answer is sometimes, because the idea of these sequences is fantastic. sharks swimming through houses, sliding through hallways, appearing in spaces that should feel safe. That's instantly engaging. There's something about taking a familiar environment, your home, your street, your car, and turning it into a high-stakes survival zone that just works. It taps into a very direct, almost instinctive discomfort. It creates a kind of tension that's built on contrast, safety versus danger. The idea that the places designed to protect you are now exposing you. And when that contrast is used effectively, it can create moments that feel uniquely unsettling because they're rooted in environments the audience instinctively understands. Familiar versus threatening, and when the movie leans into that, you can feel the potential. There are moments where the action clicks, moments where survival feels creative, moments where the chaos actually becomes entertaining. You start to see glimpses of how effective this concept can be when it's allowed to breathe, when the environment and the threat are working together instead of just coexisting. Some of the encounters land. Some of the more intense moments hit the expected notes. There's enough visual impact, enough disruption, enough movement to remind you this is still a shark movie. It doesn't shy away from delivering on that basic promise. And for certain viewers, that's enough. They're here for the spectacle. They're here for the chaos. They're here to see people taken out in increasingly unpredictable situations. And the film does provide that to a degree. It checks those boxes. It gives you moments that are visually engaging, even if they don't linger emotionally. But here's where it starts to fall short. The set pieces don't always escalate. They exist, but they don't build. And that lack of escalation is what keeps them from becoming memorable. Because a great set piece doesn't just present danger, it transforms it. It starts in one place and ends somewhere bigger, more intense, more unpredictable. You'll get a strong idea, a great setup, a situation that should become unforgettable, and then it just plays out, without pushing further, without adding a twist, without taking it to that next level where the audience loses their footing and starts reacting instead of predicting. And that's the difference between a good action sequence and a great one. Great set pieces evolve. They surprise you. They shift direction. They introduce new complications mid-sequence, forcing characters to adapt in real time. They build momentum within themselves. Here, a lot of the action feels contained, self-contained, almost isolated. You see the danger, you get the encounter, you get the escape, and then it moves on. It doesn't linger. It doesn't stretch the tension. It doesn't fully capitalize on the space it's created. The environment is there, the threat is there, but the sequence doesn't expand beyond its initial idea. That's especially noticeable when it comes to the sharks themselves. They're present, they're active, but they don't always feel dominant. They don't feel like they own the environment. They feel like elements within it, appearing when needed, disappearing when not, and that changes how you perceive them. Because in the most effective creature features, the threat controls the space. It dictates movement. It shapes behavior. It forces characters to adapt constantly. Here, the sharks often feel like they're entering scenes rather than owning them, and because of that, the action loses impact. The threat feels intermittent instead of ever present. Now, tone plays a big role here too, because a lot of these moments aren't played purely for fear. They lean into something else, something slightly exaggerated, slightly absurd, sometimes even comedic. There's a tonal looseness to the action that shifts how you experience it. You'll get scenes that feel intense on the surface, but underneath, there's a layer of exaggeration, a reaction that's just a bit too heightened, a situation that stretches just a bit too far, and depending on how you watch the movie, that either works for you or completely takes you out of it. For some, it becomes part of the fun. The over-the-top nature, the unpredictable situations, the borderline parody energy, it turns the action into entertainment rather than tension. You're not watching to feel uneasy, you're watching to be amused by how far the film is willing to go. And in that context, the lack of realism becomes a feature, not a flaw, but for others, it undercuts everything. Because once you start reacting with amusement instead of concern, the tension fades. And once that happens, the set pieces lose their weight. They're no longer survival sequences. They're just moments, visual beats without emotional consequence. And that's really what defines the action in Thrash. It has all the right ingredients, creative environments, a strong central threat, opportunities for unforgettable sequences. But it never fully pushes those elements far enough. It stops just short of commitment, either to intensity or to exaggeration. It gives you glimpses of what could have been great without ever fully delivering on it. You can see the potential in almost every setup, but the follow-through rarely matches it. And over time, that starts to feel like a pattern. So in the end, the action does enough to keep things moving. It gives you spectacle. It gives you chaos. It gives you a few satisfying moments, but it stops just short of being something you'll actually remember. And in a movie like this, that's a missed opportunity, because this is the part of the film that should define it. This is where Thrash becomes complicated, because at any given moment you have to ask yourself, what kind of movie is this trying to be? Is it a survival thriller? Is it a creature feature horror? Is it a dark comedy? Or is it one of those so chaotic it's entertaining experiences? And the truth is, it never fully commits to just one. It keeps shifting between them, testing different tones without fully settling into any of them. And that lack of commitment becomes one of its defining traits. At times, the film clearly wants to be taken seriously. You've got emotional backstories, you've got grief, you've got survival stakes. You've got a disaster scenario that should feel intense and grounded. In those moments, the movie leans into tension. It plays scenes straight. It asks you to care about what's happening and to feel the pressure. It tries to anchor itself in something real, but then something shifts. A line of dialogue lands a little too strangely. A situation becomes just a bit too exaggerated. A decision feels so off that you can't help but react. And suddenly you're no longer tense. You're reacting in a completely different way, not because the film set it up intentionally, but because the moment broke its own illusion. Now, sometimes that feels deliberate. There are moments where the film clearly embraces its own exaggerated nature. A bit of dark humor slips in. A scene plays just slightly over the top. The movie almost signals that it understands how far it's pushing things. And in those moments, it works because there's clarity. The film knows what it's doing and the audience knows how to respond. Because if the film had fully committed to that tone, if it leaned all the way into chaotic, self-aware creature feature energy, it could have been something really fun. Something that doesn't ask to be taken seriously, but instead invites you to enjoy the ride. But it doesn't stay there. It swings back into seriousness, back into emotional beats, back into trying to build tension again. And that constant shift creates a disconnect, because the audience doesn't know how to feel. The emotional signals keep changing. Should you be on the edge of your seat, or should you be taking it in as a wild, unpredictable ride? And when a movie keeps asking both, it risks doing neither effectively, because tension requires commitment, so does humor, and without committing to either, both start to weaken. That's why so many people end up watching Thrash in a completely different way than intended, not as a tightly controlled thriller, but as a so chaotic it's entertaining experience, the kind you watch with friends, the kind where you react out loud, the kind where the exaggerated moments become the highlight, because once you stop taking it seriously, the movie actually becomes more enjoyable. There's a shift in how you engage with it. You stop expecting precision and you start appreciating the chaos for what it is. The questionable decisions, entertaining, the over-the-top scenarios, memorable in their own way, the dialogue, sometimes unintentionally amusing. Moments that might have frustrated you before suddenly become part of the appeal. You're not resisting the film anymore, you're going along with it. It turns into an experience. Not because it's doing something masterful, but because its flaws become part of the fun. You're reacting to it in real time, not analyzing it. And that kind of engagement, while very different from traditional suspense, is still valid in its own way. And honestly, that might be where Thrash works best, because when it tries to be a tight, suspenseful thriller, it struggles. But when it leans into its own chaos, even unintentionally, it becomes something else entirely, something looser, something easier to enjoy, something that doesn't need to justify itself as long as it keeps you engaged. The problem is, it never fully realizes that version of itself. It never fully commits to the chaos. It never fully embraces the exaggerated tone, and it never fully locks into serious tension either. It stays in between, constantly shifting, never settling, and that middle ground is tricky. Because in a genre like this, you either need to be sharp or bold. You either refine the formula until it feels fresh, or you push it so far that it becomes something heightened and self-aware. And Thrash tries to be both, without fully succeeding at either. So what you're left with is a film that changes depending on how you watch it. Take it seriously, it feels flawed. Watch it casually, it becomes entertaining. Watch it with friends, it might even become memorable. But as a defined tonal experience, it never quite finds its identity. And that's what makes it so unpredictable, not in its story, but in how it makes you feel. Your reaction becomes part of the experience. The film doesn't guide you into one clear emotional lane. You end up choosing one for yourself. This is one of those elements you don't always expect to stand out in a movie like this, but in Thrash. It actually does, because while a lot of the film struggles with consistency, story, tone, tension, the soundtrack and overall atmosphere quietly do a lot of heavy lifting in the background, and sometimes they're the reason scenes work at all. From early on, the film uses music to push momentum. There's a certain energy to it, a rhythm that keeps things moving even when the story itself starts to feel thin. It fills in the gaps between scenes, smoothing transitions that might otherwise feel abrupt. And in several moments, that music becomes the glue holding everything together. Because when the pacing is fast, and the scenes are jumping, and the tension isn't always landing, the soundtrack steps in to keep the experience flowing. It gives the film a pulse. Something steady that carries you forward even when the structure starts to wobble. Now, stylistically, there's something interesting happening here too. At times, the music leans into a slightly retro feel, almost an 80s style tone in certain moments. Not overly dominant, not full throwback mode, but just enough to give the film a bit of character. A subtle layer that separates it from feeling completely generic, and that matters. Because that kind of sound can subtly shift how you experience the movie. It can make things feel more heightened, more stylized, even a little more playful. It introduces a tonal flexibility that the rest of the film struggles to manage on its own. And when the film starts drifting into that borderline exaggerated, chaotic energy, the music actually complements it. It helps bridge that gap between tension and entertainment. It smooths over tonal inconsistencies by giving scenes a consistent emotional rhythm, even when the visuals or performances are pulling in different directions. There are moments where a scene might not fully land on its own, but the score gives it just enough push to feel engaging. Just enough atmosphere to keep you locked in. It elevates scenes just enough to prevent them from feeling flat, even if they don't fully succeed on a narrative level. But here's the flip side. While the soundtrack adds energy, it doesn't always deepen immersion, because atmosphere isn't just about momentum, it's about feeling the environment. It's about making the audience experience the space, not just observe it. And in a film like this, atmosphere should be overwhelming. You should feel the storm, the wind, the chaos, the pressure of being trapped in rising water. You should feel like you're inside it, like the environment itself is closing in. And that's where Thrash feels a bit limited. The sound design and environmental atmosphere don't always match the intensity of the situation. The storm doesn't always feel as powerful as it should. The world doesn't always feel as hostile as it looks. There's a gap between what you're seeing and what you're feeling. So while the music adds energy, the overall atmosphere doesn't always fully pull you in. You're engaged but not completely immersed. You're following the experience rather than being absorbed by it. And that's the difference, because great atmosphere makes you feel like you're part of the experience. It surrounds you, it overwhelms you. Here you're more of an observer, still watching, still entertained, but not fully inside the chaos. That said, the soundtrack itself remains one of the more consistently positive elements. It keeps scenes moving. It enhances tone when the film leans into its more playful side. It adds personality to a movie that otherwise relies heavily on familiar genre beats. It gives the film an identity in moments where the narrative doesn't fully provide one. So while it may not transform the film, it definitely improves it. And in a movie where so many elements are uneven, that consistency stands out. Now, on the surface, Thrash looks like pure genre entertainment. Sharks, floods. People trying to survive, that's the pitch. But underneath all of that, there are hints, small ones, but noticeable, of something more. The film touches on ideas that go beyond just survival, and the biggest one is this. What happens when warnings are ignored? Before the storm hits, there are signs, there are alerts, there's information telling people what's coming, and yet some people stay, some people dismiss it, some people underestimate it. And the film doesn't spend a lot of time analyzing that choice, but it presents it clearly enough for you to recognize the pattern. And when the hurricane finally arrives, it's already too late. The consequences aren't gradual, they're immediate and overwhelming. And in that sense, the film taps into something very real. The idea that danger isn't always sudden, it's often preceded by warnings that go unheeded. That's where the film starts to connect with a very real-world idea. The consequences of complacency, the danger of thinking, it won't be that serious. That quiet confidence people have before something goes wrong, the belief that you've seen storms before, that you know how to handle it, that this one won't be different. And the film reflects that mindset without needing to spell it out. It shows how quickly that assumption collapses once reality hits harder than expected. And layered on top of that, there's a clear connection to environmental anxiety. The idea that extreme events, storms, flooding, environmental strain, are becoming more severe, more unpredictable, and more disruptive. Even if the film doesn't directly comment on it, the imagery alone carries that weight. A town overwhelmed, systems stretched too thin, nature behaving in a way that feels bigger than human control. It taps into a modern concern that doesn't need explanation, it's already familiar. Now, the movie doesn't explore this deeply. It's not trying to be a message-driven film. It doesn't pause to analyze or reflect, but the presence of that idea is there, sitting just beneath the surface. A storm that overwhelms a town, a system that fails to fully protect people, a situation where preparation isn't enough or isn't taken seriously, and that subtle grounding gives the disaster a bit more weight than just random chaos. It suggests that what's happening isn't entirely out of nowhere, it's part of a larger pattern. Then there's the human element within that chaos, because while the storm is external, some of the problems are internal, and those internal issues don't disappear when disaster hits, they become more visible, more intense, more consequential. You've got neglect, you've got selfish decisions, you've got people prioritizing the wrong things at the worst possible time. Choices that might seem small under normal circumstances suddenly carry massive consequences when everything starts to fall apart. And the film even briefly acknowledges that contrast. The foster parents, for example, represent a different kind of danger, one that exists even before the sharks arrive, a quieter, more grounded threat. And when the disaster hits, those flaws don't disappear, they get exposed, amplified by the situation, made impossible to ignore. That's something the film hints at, the idea that crisis reveals character. Not just who people are, but who they really are when pressure strips everything else away, who steps up, who freezes, who makes things worse, who looks out for others, and who looks out only for themselves. And even in smaller moments, you see that contrast, people trying to help each other, people making sacrifices, and others making decisions that feel careless or short-sighted. Decisions driven by panic, by denial, by instinct rather than thought. It creates a spectrum of behavior that feels recognizable, even if it isn't deeply explored. Now again, this isn't deeply explored. The film doesn't slow down enough to really dig into these ideas. It introduces them, but doesn't fully develop them. It gestures toward complexity without committing to it, and that's the missed opportunity. Because with a premise like this, there's room to say something meaningful about survival, not just physically, but socially and emotionally, about how people respond to crisis, about who gets left behind, about how systems fail and what individuals do in that vacuum, about the difference between preparation and reaction. Instead, those ideas stay in the background. They're there if you notice them, but they're not driving the story. They don't shape the narrative in a meaningful way. They don't influence the outcomes in a way that feels intentional. So what you're left with is a film that has the beginnings of thematic depths, but never fully commits to it. And in a way, that fits the rest of the movie, because just like the tension, just like the characters, just like the structure, the themes are present, but not fully realized. They add texture, they add context. They make the world feel slightly more grounded, but they never become the core. They're supporting elements, not defining ones. And that's why, at the end of the day, Thrash still feels like a genre film first and a thematic one second. The ideas are there, but they're not what the film is built around. At the end of the day, this is where Thrash either works for you or completely falls apart, because everything about this movie depends on how you approach it. Not what it is, but what you expect it to be. If you go into this thinking you're about to watch a tight, high-level survival thriller, something intense, polished, and unforgettable, you're probably going to walk away disappointed. Because this movie isn't built for that. It doesn't have the depth, it doesn't have the consistency, and it doesn't have the discipline to deliver that kind of experience. But if you adjust your expectations, everything changes. Because Thrash works best as a casual watch, a weekend movie, a late-night pick, something you throw on when you don't want to think too hard, something that doesn't demand your full attention, but still gives you enough to stay engaged. And in that context, it actually works. The runtime is short, the pacing is quick, it gets to the point and doesn't drag. You're not committing to a long, heavy experience. You're just stepping into a fast-moving, chaotic scenario and riding it out. There's a simplicity to that experience that makes it accessible. That alone gives it value, not as something lasting, but as something immediate, something that fits a specific viewing mood. Now let's talk replay value. This is not the kind of movie you revisit for depth. It's not the kind of film you rewatch to catch hidden details or layered storytelling, because there isn't much beneath the surface to rediscover. The film doesn't reward close analysis. It doesn't build toward that kind of engagement. Once you've seen it, and that's something a lot of viewers agree on. It's a one-time watch. Something that entertains you in the moment but doesn't stay with you afterward. It doesn't leave questions behind. It doesn't invite reinterpretation. It just ends. Give it a week or two and it fades. Not because it's ineffective, but because it doesn't anchor itself in your memory. It doesn't have that defining element that lingers. But here's the interesting part. That doesn't mean it has no replay value at all. Because for some people, this becomes a so chaotic it's entertaining rewatch. The kind you come back to with friends. The kind you don't take seriously. The kind where the enjoyment comes from reacting to it, not analyzing it. In that setting, it actually becomes more fun the second time, because now you're not expecting anything. You already know what it is, so you lean into it. You anticipate the exaggerated moments. You enjoy them more because you're prepared for them. You react to the questionable decisions. You point out the over-the-top setups. You treat the film like a shared experience rather than a narrative to follow. And that shift changes how it lands. You're not judging it anymore, you're engaging with it. And that's where Thrash finds its second life, not as a strong film, but as an easy, entertaining one. Something that fits into a very specific kind of viewing experience. So really, it comes down to this. If you want something meaningful, memorable, or refined, this isn't it. But if you want something quick, watchable, and occasionally fun, something you can throw on without thinking too much, then Thrash delivers just enough. It's not a movie you remember, it's a movie you pass through, and sometimes. That's exactly what people are looking for. Not every viewing experience needs to linger. Not every film needs to leave a mark. There's a space for movies that exist in the moment, films that occupy your attention for an hour and a half and then quietly step aside. And Thrash fits into that space almost perfectly. So where does Thrash actually land? After everything, the premise, the execution, the highs, the frustrations, what is this movie, really? It's a film that almost works. That's the best way to describe it, because from the very beginning you can see the potential. The idea is strong. The setup is effective. The cast is capable. There are moments, real moments, where it feels like the movie is about to come together into something genuinely solid. Moments where the concept, the tension, and the performances briefly align in a way that hints at something better, but it never fully gets there. Instead, it keeps slipping. Just when it feels like it's about to tighten, it loosens. Just when it feels like it's about to commit, it pulls back. The story doesn't hold together as tightly as it should. The tension never fully locks in. The characters don't evolve the way they need to. The tone keeps shifting. And because of that, the film ends up feeling incomplete, not broken, not unwatchable, but not fully realized either. It sits in that middle space, between good and forgettable, between entertaining and frustrating, between thriller and unintentional comedy. A space where individual elements work just enough to keep the film afloat, but not enough to elevate it. And that balance, just barely holding together, is what defines the entire experience. And that's why reactions to it are all over the place, because the film doesn't guide you toward a single clear response. It leaves room for interpretation, not in its story, but in its effectiveness. Some people see it as a complete miss, a messy, inconsistent shark movie that wastes a great concept, a film that had everything it needed to succeed, but never found the discipline to follow through. Others see it as exactly what it's supposed to be, a fast, exaggerated, easy-to-watch creature feature, something that delivers enough chaos, enough movement, enough spectacle to justify its runtime without asking for anything more. And honestly, both perspectives are valid, because Thrash is one of those movies that changes depending on how you watch it. The experience isn't fixed, it's flexible. It depends on your expectations, your mood, and how seriously you choose to engage with it. Take it seriously, and the flaws stand out immediately. The inconsistencies, the missed opportunities, the lack of cohesion, they become impossible to ignore. Watch it casually, and the entertainment starts to come through. The pacing feels smoother. The exaggerated moments feel more intentional. The experience becomes lighter, easier, more forgiving. It's not trying to reinvent the genre. It's not trying to be the next Jaws. It's not even trying to be the best version of its own idea. It's just existing in that space. A mid-tier, high-concept shark movie that delivers enough to keep you watching, but not enough to leave a lasting impact. And that's the key takeaway, because when the movie ends, you don't walk away thinking about the story. You don't think about the characters. You don't replay the tension in your head. You remember the idea. Flooded town, sharks in houses. Survival in chaos. The concept stays with you. The movie itself, not as much, because what lingers isn't what the film did, it's what it promised. The imagination it sparked at the beginning ends up being stronger than the execution that followed. And maybe that's the final verdict. Thrash is proof that a great idea can carry a film, but it can't complete it. It can pull you in. It can keep you watching. It can even entertain you for a while. But without strong execution behind it, it just can't go all the way. It remains potential, not payoff. So is it worth watching? If you're a shark movie fan, yes. If you want something quick and chaotic, yes. If you're looking for something memorable, probably not. Because Thrash isn't a movie you walk away from thinking, it's a movie you finish and go, yeah, that was something. And then you move on.